Right. If any, I'm just going to ask if you could keep your microphones off during the presentation, unless you want to. You've got a really pressing question. So, first of all, can I check that the screen is? You can all see the presentation, and it's just changed to something about age and driver course. If that hasn't happened, could somebody just switch on um, and let me know? Otherwise, I'll just carry on. The picture you saw on the previous course was when I was asked to sit on the question panel at the older Road Safety GB Older Road User Conference back in 2018. And I just remember from there that I made the point in answer to a question that there's loads of fantastic research in the area of older drivers, but the most of it, from as far as I can see, comes to the same conclusions that older drivers are generally a safe group of drivers. So then you ask the question, well, two things. First of all, so what's the problem? Um, and secondly, if all the research is saying the same and we're still carrying out all this research, my point was, when are we actually going to do anything? Having said that, they asked me what I would do, and I said the first thing we got to do is get ADIs some background on older drivers, because it's a sort of a it's different. Even if you've done fleet driver training, you need to know a bit more. So they put this course together on my suggestion, and I was on I didn't run the course, but I was on the sort of focus group to put it together, I guess. I had an input on that. And it's a fantastic course. They did a lot of it for free. I think they're charging now. It's on the Road Safety GB website, the Academy website. And they included the role of diabetes, but despite my sort of strong insistence almost, they refused to put anything about dementia, effectively saying that ADIs don't need to get involved with it. It's a medical thing. But that's the wrong in my view, because it's as people get older, much more likely to have a cognitive impairment, and it's a road safety issue. So a bit of background there. And then a little bit more, just started off in learner drivers, of course. Fleet drivers, completely got rid of the learners, went into fleet drivers for a few years, and then started working as a road safety officer for Hampshire County Council back in 2008, running a really good scheme, which has been running for since the year 1999, I think. Really, it's still running today. Driver Skills Scheme 60 plus. I'll talk a bit more about that soon. Rob Hurd, when he started the Older Drivers Forum, came to me at the beginning to talk about putting something together, because it started off as the Hampshire and Isle of Wight Older Drivers Forum. So that was about 2013, and Rob's gone on to great things, really. He's really the leading figure in older driver sort of, policy, if you like, almost. But certainly he's very well respected in older drivers forum terms. Done speaking at conferences, and also because the Hampshire scheme was so sort of well known and doing such a good job, as many others do. But I was actually asked to get involved with three different videos for BBC over a couple of 2 or 3 year period, culminating in a live appearance on the BBC One show after assessing John Sargent and Jenny Bond. So that was fantastic experience. And also on the focus group for the Older Driver Task Force report to Parliament, which is it's quite a long report. It's actually a good report about not just driving assessments, but all road layout, all sorts of things. So it's called Supporting Safer Driving into Older Age, and you can look that up and read through that online. I said about the Asian driver course. So just I think a lot of people that have done the course which I'm running, I switched to this webinar, but we used to run a part one and a part two. this is effectively the part one. It gives a lot of background and a bit of the part two in it. But a lot of the people who've done it slow for had done the aging driver course. But for those that haven't, as age increases, we slow down in the rate of information processing. So you've only got to think, for example, of an 80-year-old given a new phone for Christmas. It takes a bit of getting used to, or what do I do here? And it's all very slow. And whereas an 18-year-old will get hold of it, oh yeah, let's switch it on, and they're up and running straight away. And actually, I sat in a car with a 93-year-old week before last. Great driver, but there was so many gadgets in his car, and you could just see him sort of getting really confused by it. Or and because that's natural in the aging process. We can't process information so quickly. Changes to eyesight, so we get dazzled for longer by oncoming headlights, for example, or low sun. It takes longer for our eyes to get back to normal, and an increased chance of a medical condition, which is what really we're bringing in this evening. But having said that, older drivers recognize their skills are reducing and compensate generally as a group. So they avoid the more complex type of roads, roundabouts, if they possibly can, and motorways in many cases. Um, they tend to stick to familiar roads rather than go on journeys they don't really know so well. And time of day, avoiding busy times, avoiding driving at night because of the natural eyesight issue when we get older. So they're very sensible on that front, but they have a bad name and a bad reputation in the perception of the general public in many cases. I believe it's largely based on two things. First of all, the national newspaper headlines, where you get sort of sensationalist reporting and comments to the effect that all older drivers should retake a test, which I completely disagree with personally. Don't think it would work. And over drivers over 80 shouldn't be driving even. You get all sorts of comments, and it sort of tells you a bit about public perception about older drivers. But the other thing is we get stuck behind somebody that's clearly getting on a bit in age, going very slowly on a country lane, can't overtake, so we're getting really frustrated, and we see that as representative of older drivers, but we don't notice all the ones that aren't getting in our way. And in my time with Hampshire, I sat next to loads and loads, but I oversaw pretty much all the reports that came in over those 15 years, which is at least 5,000 drivers, and about a third of those had cognitive impairment. Um, and you can see the difference. You can see the ones without a cognitive impairment were generally very good drivers. Where they weren't so good, it's normally due to slowness of thinking. So it's a perception, not necessarily true one. Now, most of these headline grabbing collisions, which are often called catastrophic by insurance companies because um, they cost a lot to the insurance companies, turning right across traffic, either into or out of a side road. Pedal confusion, so there's the junction. Pedal confusion in an automatic car where they hit the accelerator, end up through a brick wall or whatever, or driving the wrong way down the motorway. That if you look at the headlines, the ones that make the front pages and give older drivers a bad name, it's normally through one of these. And certainly the last two, you could quite easily explain by cognitive slowness, cognitive impairment, either through very old age or a cognitive medical condition. And or you can also explain the junction one through that, but I'll try and explain a bit more about that in a minute because it takes a bit of time to explain. So all of these catastrophic collisions could be explained in many parts by cognitive impairment rather than just age. And then if we look at the statistics, this graph says 2011, but the reason I used it is because of the particular shape of it. They still publish results on road traffic accidents every year, um, but the shape of this graph was useful. And if you look at one from last year, it's very similar. You'd get a very similar shape, very consistent. So older drivers are among the safest up to around 75. The age groups here, the way they split up doesn't really show this, but if you look at drivers between about 50 and 75 are generally, as a group, the safest out there. Once you start getting above 75 and certainly above 80, you tend to get more represented in road traffic collisions road traffic collisions. And as this one shows, in fatalities. And just bearing in mind the only generally the only road traffic collisions that are recorded are the ones that involve either serious injury or fatality, but also the minor injuries get put in there as well. So it's not that older drivers generally are becoming unsafe. The reason they're getting killed in larger numbers, it's because they're more frail. So if an 18-year-old, let's say, falls over and trips down a couple of steps, they're probably going to get up with a bruise and walk off. If an 85-year-old does that, he's far more likely to get a broken hip. So any given collision, the older people are far more likely to be seriously injured or killed in that collision compared with the younger ones. And then if you look at this particular research, it shows that older drivers are no greater risk to other road users than pretty much any other age group. This is about, I think, pedestrians, isn't it? Yeah. Pedestrians, look on my big screen, injured by car license holders 2015 to 2019. So they're not a danger to other road users, particularly. A reason they're represented in statistics is because they are more frail. In 2023, the BBC put in the Freedom of Information request to DVLA, and it showed that other than the COVID year, the number of people reporting concerns about an older driver were rising. And in 2022, there were about almost 50,000 people put in concerns about an older driver. Now, that 50,000 is a tiny percentage, presumably, almost certainly, of the number of people across the country that have concerns about an older driver. And the problem is, at the moment, they don't get any help really, not satisfactory help. And that's where ADIs can come in and people that run driver assessment schemes, for example. Because if we look at who is, if one of us has got a concern about an older relative, um, who do we go to? You know, we've talked to that relative and they refuse to listen. They won't stop driving. So short of taking the keys away, which doesn't always work in itself, because I've known stories where the person's just gone out and bought another car from their savings. But you know, what can we do if we're really concerned for the safety of a loved one? The police can't really help because they more likely need to see a collision before they can do anything. Um, so in general, they can't really do much. Doctors, you would think, if it's a medical thing, would advise the person not to drive, but that doesn't happen for various reasons. I've got a great little animated video on my website, not a website, on my YouTube channel, which shows exactly the reasons why doctors can't always help, and you know, puts you in the place of the doctor trying to make that decision, knowing nothing about the person's driving. A local ADI might be able to help, but the problem is, you know, we mentioned about the Asian driver course. ADIs have been heavily discouraged from getting involved with this. And that means there are no training courses like this. There are other type of training courses, given a bit of background on driving with dementia, for example, from driving mobility, but no courses like this from an ADI point of view, as far as I know. So ADIs don't know what to look for. And the problem is if an ADI gets involved with somebody with dementia or concerns where there may be an undiagnosed dementia, they can get it wrong, and getting it wrong can make matters even worse sometimes in certain instances because it gives false confidence. Driving mobility, I'm sure many of you have heard of. I'll talk a bit more about them in a minute, but they're a very good organization that runs assessments, in these case, fitness to drive assessments using occupational therapists and driving assessors. Um, but I will talk more about them soon. And the other thing is you can, like we said earlier, report to DVLA. The problem here is it does start a medical inquiry going, but if you've got an older relative that you're really concerned about at this point, and you're worried that they're going to have a nasty accident, kill themselves or kill somebody else, um, DVLA medical inquiries tend to take many weeks or even months. So, in 6 months' time, if they haven't finished the inquiry yet, that's a long time for a person that's unsafe to carry on driving without restriction. Um, and again, that's a big issue. There are currently nearly 1 million people with dementia in the UK, and it's estimated about a third of those go undiagnosed. Um, the diagnosis rates in some areas of Britain are even worse than that, actually. So, that's suggesting that in the UK, there's at least 300,000 drivers, oh, sorry, people with undiagnosed dementia, and many of those will be driving. Even the diagnosed dementia, there's still quite a lot of those drive because there's no real restrictions at early stages. And sometimes, because of the system, they carry on driving into mid to even, you know, late stages of dementia when they are completely unsafe. And I don't know where you all live, of course, all across the UK, I guess, but the blue or greeny blue colours on that map are the highest instances where people live with dementia. And they tend to be on retirement places on the coasts. I live down in Bournemouth on the south coast there. So my area is one of the highest in the country. Um, and as I say, I don't know where your areas are, but those are the areas that affected most. But there's also spread out uh, across the country. And we've obviously with my job, I've sat with many, many drivers or seen their reports at least with early stages of dementia, particularly Alzheimer's. And they, if they stick to roads they know well and go to things like the shopping centre, the doctors, the friends, or whatever, do regular routes, they actually can get by quite safely. Because much of the time, driving relies on subconscious mind and muscle memory. And even you will have, I'm sure all of you will recognize autopilot where you've been on a long journey. You get back and you simply cannot remember a large part of that journey, like the last village you went to, because you've been running on subconscious mind and muscle memory. The difference is, of course, if something suddenly changed, like a kid started running towards the road, presumably you'd be much slower to react than you would if you were fully conscious, but you would react and your conscious mind would kick in and decide what to do very quickly. That doesn't really happen so easily with dementia because they're not capable of coming out of that, if you like, because of the cognitive impairment. And understanding, if you, again, because we did two-thirds standard driving assessments and one-third generally cognitive impairment, which was largely dementia, but also after a stroke, Parkinson's, etc., things like this. You can clearly see, even if you didn't know about the medical side, there are clear signs which tell you that there's potentially a cognitive issue there. And those signs are things like multitasking problems, which, so for example, I give this example of an assessment I did for somebody with fairly early stages of outs, or had only just been diagnosed anyway, doesn't necessarily get diagnosed at an early stage, but Alzheimer's this lady had, and said that all she's, or her husband said all she's interested in doing is going down to the to Sainsbury's store in the town and a couple of other places. So I said, okay, we can drive there and see what she's like. And she was very good. No problems at all. Parked up in Sainsbury's car park, went to the doctor's, and then when we stopped at the side of the road somewhere safe, I said, well, no real problems there. But what we need to do is go home a different route because imagine that one's just been closed off by a accident or something. So what I want you to do, rather than turning left out of the doctor's car park, can you turn right? And um, do you know your way home from there? Because she'd lived in the area for many years, so it was all very familiar to her. She'd go, oh, yeah, I think I go home from. So she did need a little bit of assistance, and you could see her getting more and more concerned about which way she was going to go at the next junction. So occasionally I just gave her a bit of assistance. That doesn't necessarily mean somebody's not fit to drive, um, because it depends how they react to getting lost, for example. But what this lady did, because it was all getting on her mind, she completely missed out and went straight across um, a mini roundabout, which she would have been very familiar with, and the road she was on, but she completely missed it because she wasn't able to multitask, find ways, and deal with all the signs and everything. And of course, luckily we had a good view and I could see nothing coming, but I could see that she wasn't even looking to the right. So that's an example of multitasking. It doesn't come up on simple roads, but as soon as they get on something more complicated, particularly a complex roundabout, that shows up. Um, Visual spatial perception problems, often you'll see somebody with a cognitive impairment, even if you don't know about it, you'll find they're driving on the white line. Um, and That's a really good sign of a potential visual-spatial problem. Or they're shaving parked cars unnecessarily, or they have a real problem in parking efficiently in a big, busy car park. They find the tightest little space and shuffle when there's plenty of more space around them. Problem solving difficulty. So if a road's closed off and or something suddenly changes, to actually deal with that, they have great difficulties sometimes. So they might just suddenly, I've had people just suddenly just come to a stop in the middle of a road because they can't deal with this problem and they need time to think. And of course, that is a safety issue, definitely. These are all not be all and end all things, but they're all evidence to add to your sort of report at the end if you're doing one of these. Focusing attention to the driving task is very common. They struggle with that. So on the one hand, you might get a driver that you're sitting next to is staring fixedly ahead, not scanning left to right or looking in the door mirrors or the main mirror, just focusing on the road ahead so they can deal with steering the car, keeping the car on the straight and narrow, whatever. Um, but on the other hand, and it particularly comes up with Alzheimer's, they're in a jolly mood, they're driving along and they're pointing out, that's where I went to school, that's where my friend lives. Oh, I used to go, constantly talking about stuff outside the car with no focus whatsoever on the driving task. Um, and a lot of drivers may do that occasionally or talk to passengers, but you see the difference. This is really excessive. So again, that's a good thing that they finding trouble. Their attention to the driving task is not easy. And I ought to just mention after a quick drink, by the way, I did an hour and a half web similar type of thing but for an hour and a half. Only finished that about 7, so my voice is a bit dry. 2007, the Hampshire County Council team, I joined 2008, so it had been set up and running. I just did a lot of sort of, for various reasons, improvement because the older drivers forum were sort of coming up with reasons why we shouldn't be operating, and we just improved it to satisfy that, I guess. So I did a lot of improvements on it, but it had already been running for several years, and we won an International Road Safety Award, mainly because it's the only such scheme, driving assessment scheme, as far as I'm aware, that has ever been able to find a direct correlation between the driver assessment and driver assessments they do and the casualty reduction in that same area. Because if you imagine, I know many of you are involved with driver assessments. The If we take the IAM one, for example, very good service for drivers that are interested in safety. But the fact is, it's an hour long, and in an hour you are just assessing. Um, Even if you can get some training in there, there's no evidence to show that that makes much of a difference to safety. I mean, it's got to have some effect at raising awareness of issues, but generally what happens on those schemes, you attract the drivers that were already interested in safety, not the unsafe ones. Um, they're on their best behavior and fully concentrating, and we know that doesn't happen in real life where people are um, vulnerable to a crash is when they're not focusing or they're distracted or something. And you don't get that on assessments normally. You don't see that. Um, and the other thing is extremely difficult, particularly as the in older drivers, to change the habits of a lifetime. You get short-term changes if you work with them, but often when you go back, and I've done this many times, you find that the problem they had a year ago is back again, even if there was a short-term thing. So driver assessments don't really affect road casualties. This one did. Why? Because we, after finding the standard approach didn't work, we had a big problem in the New Forest area of Hampshire and on older drivers. And my predecessor contacted as many doctors and medical practitioners in Hampshire as possible, and they started sending through referrals from drivers that they thought might be becoming unsafe. So rather than having a scheme where you're just assessing generally safe drivers mainly, now you're assessing the most unsafe drivers because either a family member or doctors expressed concerns. And that's the statistics they use. So 3 areas of Hampshire over a 4 year period, 2002, 2003 was when they were still more or less running standard assessments. And then they introduced these doctor referrals things over those 2004, 2005. And you can see that there's across the board a drop of around about 35% in each area. So it was consistent. But unfortunately, despite or my predecessors sort of messaging to other local authorities, organizations, it was never replicated, this approach. And they're still doing it today, actually. Still, my last year there, for example, we think assessed nearly 200 people that had some form of cognitive impairment, mainly dementia. And out of that 200, bearing in mind some of them we sort of said, okay, you're okay just at the moment. We'll see you again in 6 months or a year's time. But 50 of those we took off the roads because with dementia, there's no point in recommending refresher training or just putting on a report, you need to practice this. They're either safe now or not. And if they're not, dementia tends to either stay level for a while, but it's not going to get better. So you just stop them driving with the doctor, the family, get everybody involved. You have a nice chat with them, but you get them to stop driving. And that's probably why that success story happened. But nobody else does that. Having retired, I want to set up something across that is available to as many areas of the UK as possible in some form, not necessarily to that degree. So the medical investigation process, some of you may know about this, but I'm sure there's others that won't. So you're legally required to notify DVLA of certain medical conditions, and the list you can find on the .gov.uk website. If you search for medical DVLA, it will come up. And on that website, if you go to D for dementia, it will tell you you need to fill in the form CG1, send it back to DVLA. That gives your doctor's name plus other details. And DVLA set up a medical inquiry, which, as I say, can take many weeks or months to carry out. The medical inquiry generally, in most cases, revolves around contacting the driver's doctor and asking the doctor's opinion about fitness to drive. And then eventually, and this is not easy for doctors, it's an unfair ask, really, but eventually the doctor will report back to DVLA on their opinion, and then the DVLA will make a decision. But the problem is, in my view, the doctors rarely see the person drive, or sorry, they don't see the person drive, but have information about what the person's driving is like, particularly in the earlier stages. I mean, later stages, I without being medically trained, I could sit with somebody in a room in later stages of dementia and immediately rule out driving. It's sort of that obvious. But in the early stages, it's not, and there's no direct guidance to say this is fail, this is pass, whatever. So just made on medical decision alone, and I think most people would agree, and then spoken to people high up in driving mobility, and they say you need to see what the driving's like in those early stages, certainly. Now, occasionally the DVLA will direct the driver to go to driving mobility for a fitness to drive assessment, because driving mobility are the experts in this. If you're looking at fitness to drive, that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about a risk assessment to help a doctor make fitness to drive. But driving mobility do a fitness to drive or as a one-stop shop, really. And if the DVLA says to, in these few cases, says to the driver, go to driving mobility, there's no cost to the driver for that. They just have to go there. There's no getting out of that generally. But the doctor, oops, oh, there's a line missing there. Oh, I should have changed this slide. But the doctor can ask for a driving assessment, either to driving mobility for a fitness to drive assessment, or they can just get a risk assessment from a local assessor. The problem is at the moment, local assessors haven't been trained to know what to look for. So it's questionable about how useful that information is. And on the CG1 form, it says to the driver, have you had a driving assessment in the last year? If so, send us a report. How are they meant to get a driving assessment if driving assessors don't know how to have been stopped effectively from learning about driving with dementia? Now, driving mobility, like I say, excellent organization, particularly for adaptations to cars for disabled people. But the fitness to drive assessment for driving mobility, you have to find a centre on their website, which is up the top there, drivingmobility.org.uk. Most are within the 1 hour's travel, but you may have to travel even further than the centre because you have to go for them to them. They don't come to you. They do pre-drive tests, such as assessments into eyesight, reaction time, and cognitive function. And then they take you out to the vehicle, and it's a vehicle which they provide, because unless the ADI has given them refresher training and then takes that vehicle on the test, but it's got to be dual controlled on this particular layout. So they got to get used to an unusual car before they go out driving on the assessment with a driving assessor in the front, like we do as ADIs, but also with an occupational therapist sitting in the back making notes. So it's quite a pressured, daunting type of assessment. You have to allow up to 3 hours. It's about 2.5, 3 hours. And if DVLA aren't paying, if a doctor's asked you to do it, or you just decided to do it, could be somewhere between 120 and £350 for this. So you can see because it's so daunting, and I've got stories from many, many older drivers really, really anxious about this, and they find it difficult, particularly with a dementia, to go and be put through this type of assessment, however good the professionals are there. So the outcome is people simply avoid going if they can, um, which is an issue. So that means these family members are again left with no help. So like in Hampshire, they've got help, but most other counties, if they phone up for a driving assessment for their loved one who's got dementia, they're saying, sorry, we can't do that. You need to go to driving mobility. They don't go to driving mobility. So who does look after them? Who does see if they're safe or not? Well, generally, it just doesn't happen in many cases. So the question is, should we assess drivers under a standard format, um, as in driving mobility, because the license allows us to drive anywhere, pretty much, within reason? Or should we say, oh, the drivers are very sensible. They tend to compensate by staying locally. This is what they need to do. As long as we have a look at them out of their comfort zone, just in case, say, in an emergency, they went further afield, um, in their own vehicle where they feel comfortable. Is that not a fairer assessment? And so that's the important question, really, to consider. And we know that stress, because there's, again, I'll repeat this. Driving Mobility are an excellent organization, and the professionals working there are very, very good. But the point is, for somebody with dementia, being put through that standard approach can be highly stressful. Um, and then you ask, well, how are they meant to perform behind the wheel when they're under this type of stress? I know of at least 5 people over the years, and I'm sure there's been more, that within the week or few days before an important driving assessment have had a stroke or heart attack. And that's what stress can do. And I think that's probably just a small example. So it can really affect people. But on the other hand, being told to stop driving can feel far worse than the diagnosis itself. It's a life-changing thing. It's sort of in their mind, a catastrophic type of change to their independence and all sorts. And it can cause further problems. Is it not better that an ADI, friendly ADI, trained well, can sit with a family in their own living room with a cup of tea, report to a doctor eventually, and talk it through with that person rather than be in an office after an official daunting assessment that says, unfortunately, you need to stop driving, and then they've got to get home. So that's another part of it. So it's all about balance and risk assessment. We need to get the balance right. If we come down too heavily on the personal welfare side of things, because that person, if they lost their license, their life would be ruined, and okay, we better let them drive on, even though they're a little bit dangerous. That's not going to work, of course. But on the other hand, if we come down too heavily on road safety side of things and ignore the personal welfare thing, um, that can cause all sorts of other problems, not least if we stop a driver driving too early. How are they going to get about? Well, they could be a pedestrian, and older pedestrians are vulnerable to being killed on the roads, crossing roads and things. So there's not an easy answer, but it's very much a balance. And what we did was look at the whole environment. Have they got family support? Have they got access to complex roads? But so they go on by mistake. Um, do they have a husband and wife driving with them? So we risk assess the circumstances and then put the evidence down on a report and then say, over to you, medical people, this is where we're at. So, and what I'm actually doing, because I've got quite a passion for this, I've started up a Drive Talk older driver community, and I know many of you listening are ADIs. I know we have other road safety professionals as well, but we don't just need ADIs in this. We need all sorts of road safety professionals, because I we've already got about 60 people who are interested in it. And it's really just backing to try and get the word spread that these family members who are our early warning system need some more appropriate help. And I'm running it through the website, which I don't know if I've put it on here, but it will come up eventually. Um, yeah, I've got a website for driving with dementia, and it gives ADIs or any other professional just an update. I'll keep them in touch of what we're doing, where we're going, because there's various things happening on that side. I'm determined to push this into the more general road safety consciousness, if you like, and get it being discussed more. Very important point to remember, though. This is not about delivering a fitness to drive assessment, or rather a fitness to hold a driving license. That is largely a medical decision based on driving reports. But this is a risk assessment that may help a medical professional or DVLA, and our reports have helped DVLA make a decision on fitness to drive if it's done in the right way. So it's not, don't get mixed up between fitness to drive assessments, which you often hear bandied about. This is a risk assessment of what they were like on the day we saw them. So we put all that on the report, the limitations of the assessment. So just as an example, and this starts to stretch into what I call part two of the training, which I'll talk about a bit more in a minute, if anybody's interested in finding out a little bit more. You're contacted by someone asking for a driving assessment for an older relative that is less safe than they used to be. Do you agree to help? What information do you need to get? So these are the things you've got to consider. And also, what do you need to give them? What information do you need to give them? So, for example, you might have to advise them on the regulations regarding DVLA, and if they've got a medical condition, have you report to DVLA? So make sure they've done everything that they should be doing. Now, this is based on a case study I use in part two of the course. But a daughter visited her father at the weekend. Doesn't often see him, but she did notice some scratches on the car. And she also saw him drive off down the road at one. And she's got concerns, let's put it that way. And she's persuaded him to take a driving assessment. So he agrees, and you have a chat with him, and then you make an appointment. You go around there and you sit in with him on a typical journey. You've asked all the questions. You checked he's got a license, his eyesight's okay, all these things, and you've asked, are there any medical conditions that may affect your driving? No, there's not, nothing like that. But when you go out, you recognize, now this is slightly, I couldn't get this right. AI is very good, but I couldn't get the wheels on the white line, but it serves a purpose. You note often when people have got a cognitive impairment, their positioning won't be good. It's not quite that bad, but they will drive with one wheel on the white line. And normally they move across to the left if a vehicle comes, but then they're back on the white line again. They also swing wide round left-hand bends often, and they might have trouble with car parks. However, if you see this as a good quality ADI, not again, not quite this, but poor positioning, you're going to use all the tools in your sort of toolbox, if you like, to try and correct it. You might say, use your door mirror to see where the curb is and the gap. Let the smudge between the two white lines come down the middle of your steering wheel, or whatever you use, and you encourage them to do it, and then you go away afterwards thinking, yeah, well, I've done my job. But it hasn't, because it could be, well, might do, but it might not, because you often see that type of thing linked to cognitive impairment. So if it's a visual spatial problem, and you've just said, I recommend you practice getting that position right, as I've showed you, doesn't help the situation at all. In fact, it could make it worse because you've had an opportunity to pick up a potential cognitive problem and get this chap to go to the doctors or whatever, or talk to the daughter about it and say what your suspicions are. Um, and that's important. Shouldn't really be missing that possibility. Concentration. Uh, if you've got, like I said before, if you've got this intense focus, you think, oh yeah, he's just really focused. He's not using his mirrors very well, but a lot of people don't. And or you've got them talking to you a lot and looking there and there and there all the time and not really focusing. You might say that you need to focus on the driving task. I'm going to get you to talk about what you can see coming up, and I'm going. So you work with them to improve that focus, prove the mirror checks. But if it's a cognitive problem and you've missed that sign, that possibility, let's say, then again, the driver just carries on, nothing changes, and they might be the one that goes on to have a catastrophic collision in a few months' time. Lane discipline. So you imagine driving on in this type of situation, one of these spiral roundabouts, thinking how much you've got to process. You've got to process what the sign's saying, staying between the white lines, what's on my left, what's on my right, what the traffic light's doing, where do I need to come off. And that takes a lot of multitasking. And even a good driver with early stages of dementia on very quiet roads will often fall apart. They're cut across lanes without looking in the mirror because they just simply can't cope with it. They can't cope with people that get it wrong and suddenly pull across. So because that's a change to what they were expecting, and it will show up on those type of roundabouts. So you must include roundabouts in any assessment. So those are just some examples. I want to just, I mentioned this earlier, and I want to just before we finish, talk a bit more about right turns. So, as I say, older drivers are vulnerable to having collisions, particularly on nasty collisions, particularly on faster roads. So, if any of us, presumably, come up to that closed-in junction, the views aren't very good because of the trees. We get up to the white line, and then we look roughly to see whether we've got a good enough view, or do we need to just edge forward a bit more safely. But then when we're in the position, we go right, left, right, might even check again, and then we start moving. But as we start moving, particularly if there's a corner or a hidden area, say to our left, as we're moving, we do another check to the left. So that's sort of multitasking. It's looking left and moving. And what you notice, if you look carefully, anybody that has assessed a driver in their 80s, for example, or 90s particularly, or a driver with cognitive impairment, what you notice is they do it in two stages. They go right, left, right, and then they go right, off we go. And they don't do that final check because it's multitasking and they're not very good at that. And it takes 5 or 6 seconds to get across, clear that junction, and even start to build up speed for an older driver. A car coming along round the bend just round to your left at 60 miles an hour will travel something like 180 meters in that time, which, and seeing that yellow car come out that junction will expect them to stop again and see them, so they won't immediately brake. And that's really why the collision happens. Now it goes further than that, because you as an ADI, if you're like me before I realized this, will have an interest in self-preservation. So as that driver, you check whether they're looking right, and as they start to drive off, you're looking to that left. And because you're looking to the left to see if a car's about to turn up and do something about it, intervene, you're not looking at what their eyes are doing. But if you do happen to, next time you're with an older driver, have a look, are they doing that final check? Because if they're not, they still could come out of here safely. And you say, yeah, good observation, no problems there. But they're at high risk because they're not doing that final check. So that's another thing you need to sort of know about. Right, a couple of slides left. So this presentation is given the very basic understanding, and I will send these slides out to you. I've got all your email addresses, so but it's easy to get it wrong without sufficient training. and you need to protect yourself against giving an inappropriate recommendation. I use the example of a daughter, say, has come to you and said, "Look, I'm really worried about my dad. He's become unsafe, and I need you to have a look at his driving and tell him to stop driving or whatever." So you go out and sit next to the driver, and you come back and you say, "Well, I took him there and there and there. He seemed fine to me, so no problem." And then he goes out a couple of weeks later and has a bad collision, and the daughter's not gonna is gonna ask some serious questions about, well, why did you let him keep driving when I told you he was unsafe? The reason you're telling him that he's safe is because you're missing potentially some points because no one's ever allowed you to understand what cognitive impairment can do. So if you are sort of interested in one, just joining the community so you can be updated, but particularly on taking this a little bit further with case studies, I've got some part two sessions on the 22nd of May. As I say, you'll get these slides, and 27th of May, where we can take you through that. But I'd love to do it all free, but I can't, unfortunately. So that would cost £30. But pretty much everybody that has taken the part two have agreed to want to take it even further, um, and really had great feedback on it. Um, so it's how to identify signs of cognitive impairment to a higher degree, case studies, particularly about real life situations and how we dealt with them, um, and also how to make that decision, how to talk to them about it, how to work with the family. Particularly, the route is so important to give them enough rope, I suppose would be the term. Um, how to work with a medical profession, what sort of report do you need to give out so that's useful, and also how to obtain work in this situation. So that's it. I just come across here, and we've now got 5 minutes to go, or just over. So don't worry if there's not, but if there are any questions, I'm happy to take them. While you're thinking about that, I'm going to just quickly look at the chat to see. Does the elderly driver have to pay assessment fee? Yeah, for that's probably, I may have answered that in the thing after the question, but um, yeah, if it's straight recommendation, referral from DVLA, they don't. And I see Gary's answered the question. Um, but anybody else, doctor referral does. Okay, so I think that was it. Any questions, Tom? Or have I stunned you all into silence? No, no further points? Well, that's fine.
Yeah,
Oh, yeah.
just I only read my chat. Put in now. I work for driving. I work for driving mobility anyway.
Oh, right. What, as an assessor, driving assessor there?
Yeah, I do 2 days a week there.
Oh, brilliant.
So everything you said, what we go through. So
Yeah. Can I just ask then, Gary, because I've talked to many people that have worked for driving mobility, or in some cases still do, both mainly driving assessors, but also occupational therapists. And I don't know, I've not done it myself, but the general consensus is that a decision on fitness to drive is sort of 75% occupational therapist, and then the driving assessor may get about 25% of the decision. Is that fair?
yeah, because they can going back to the cognitive. Obviously, the OTs have to do the cognitive paperwork first, all the paper top exercises. We've had a few people that's completely failed that and then gone out and drove and they're perfect on the
Yeah,
road. It does depend,
yeah, yeah. It does. It does.
and
So you
I
take it all
mean, other
together.
people, yes, have failed. Yeah, other people have failed and then failed the road as well. So it's,
Yeah,
um,
yeah. That's
yeah,
fair enough.
really,
But
they can't decide if it's safe enough until they go out on road.
no, 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 definitely. Have you got any feeling on things like anxiety, nerves when they have to get into a different car they've never driven? I mean, do you get any sort of sense of how difficult or easy they find that?
We
Much feedback?
Tuesday. We had one on Tuesday, so She was really, really nervous. Um, it was her husband that persuaded her to carry on with it.
Mm.
Basically, if you don't do it, your license will be revoked. And
Okay.
this comes from the DVLA, so DVLA referral.
Yeah, fair.
She did it. Of course, she did fail. Um, but yeah, I mean, we always take them around 5 minutes first. I always explain the car to them.
Yeah, exactly.
Um, yeah,
I've
so they always before they go around
yeah,
full
brilliant.
route.
Just as I mean, obviously, you don't get to hear it was like anything. You don't get to hear about all the ones that sailed through, did really well and weren't affected by that. But I'm doing someone at the moment helping him. He's got a assessment tomorrow actually at Yeovil Assessment Centre. He'd had a stroke. He's the first to admit he's a bit overweight. He'd had this stroke. I did an assessment for him
Yeah,
some months ago and couldn't find any of the normal signs linked to cognitive stuff after the stroke. But the report, for some reason, didn't get to his consultant. His consultant reported back to DVLA that he wasn't sure, so they sending him to for an official assessment tomorrow. The which is fine.
yeah.
The point being, he is so anxious and frustrated by the whole thing, and why has he got to do it, and this type of thing. It, you can see it stressing him out, and he's actually said, "I feel like I'm probably going to have another stroke." Um, and that's what
Mm.
concerns me a little bit, because it's and there's no easy answer to it, but he's got to do it. And my job was just well, I had another look at his driving, and
How long,
I think he sailed through, but he was so nervous.
yeah.
So
How long
yeah,
has he had a stroke? Quite a long time.
I think that, yeah, he's because I first saw him back in October last year, so he had his stroke something like September or July's 4 weeks off. The occupational therapist checked his physical capabilities; they were
Yeah,
all right. His eyesight was checked, and the cognitive stuff came out a bit borderline, which I often find the case. It doesn't necessarily directly transfer to the driving, um, but it came out a little bit borderline. So the occupational therapist wanted him to go for an assessment, but for some reason the DVLA have asked him.
all we do is just try to reassure them. It's not a
Yeah,
driving test, but just assessing your fitness to drive, just to make sure you're safe on the road.
yeah, no, brilliant.
We always
Yeah,
try and get in the
yeah.
car.
But you're restricted, but you have to do it like that because it's representing the DVLA. It has to be consistent, doesn't it? There's
Yeah, yeah,
uh,
because they want the.
yeah, sure, brilliant. There's a comment just came up. I think as it's nearly time. If anybody does need to log off, I can stay around for a little bit if you want, but I won't be too put off if anybody does need to log off and disappear. It's late. Um, do you need a certain document to do a risk assessment for a person who contacts you as an ADI? Not particularly, Paul. But for best usefulness, and certainly you get more respect if this document or report, ah, document to do a risk assessment. I'm assuming, I don't know if you want to say, Paul, I'm assuming you're referring to the report that you send. But tell me if I'm wrong there. But but the report really, there's no point in doing a normal sort of standard um, driving assessment report because it doesn't necessarily there's not necessarily much use to doctors and DVLA. What DVLA I think and doctors would like to see is where have you been, what road types have you covered to check they've done the range. Was there any evidence of multitasking deficits? Was there any evidence of spatial awareness deficits? And if so, what were they? So you put like driving on the white line, for example, or cutting lanes on roundabouts with any mirror checks, potential multitasking problem. So you put the evidence down and you don't worry about, I mean, every single mirror check or whether they put the handbrake on at the traffic lights. That can be part of it as advice to them, but it's not really what the doctor needs to see. So I don't know if that's what the question meant. Grant, what have you said? A lot has been focused on England and Wales in tonight's presentation. I know that. Oh yeah, yeah. I've actually dealt with mobility or an MVS. What other measures are in place in Scotland for Scotland? There's an ADI in our community that's done the full course called Mark Allen, I think his name is. I can Grant, I could put you or I can put you in touch with him or find out if he's happy to talk to you because he I think he does assessments for IAM, but he's linked with the fitness to drive that Scotland are doing or something. So he knows a lot more about it than me. So I'm happy to do that if you want me to. There's a smart centre at the. What's a smart centre? Oh, right, that's yeah, in Edinburgh. Is that Ian? Is that like driving mobility? I don't know. Sorry, Ian, you're muted, I think, or I can't hear.
Yeah, it's a south. Can you hear me?
Yeah, can hear you now.
It's a southeast Scotland mobility
Oh yeah,
rehabilitation technology. It stands
right.
for.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So
That
they
rings
do
a
all
bell.
the assessments. Say people with
Oh, excellent.
strokes
I'm
and
learning.
dementia go there. I've been there with a number of people.
Oh,
Uh,
brilliant. I'm learning a
uh,
lot. We're talking to you guys from Scotland, because it's
it's a
quite
really good.
different.
They're really good.
Yeah,
They're very thorough, and
yeah,
I've always gone with people I've been working with.
excellent.
Uh,
I'll just
and
I'll just because time's running out, I'll just do from Sarah, where do we stand on refusing to give lessons due to safety reasons? We've had drivers come to us after having an assessment where they have driven around an industrial park with an assessor and they need to us to give them lessons to improve their skill. Um, yeah, I think the thing is, without going into more details, Sarah, it'd be difficult to give a straight answer to that. But what we've done, because bearing in mind the assessors are just ADIs like you and I, we've trained them up to understand a bit about assessment. We've done thousands of these in their own car, sometimes with quite advanced stages of dementia. And you just have to risk assess from the beginning by finding out information. If you're going to meet them at their home and they live on a really busy road, you say, no, I can't do that. Either go in my car or we meet you somewhere else, get your family member to take you there. So you do like a nursery route. And if you've got any real concerns about that, you can stop it there and then. So you're building it up really. But yeah, and I mean, with my background, if I refuse to carry on with a driving assessment or give lessons in this case, I would then fill in a report which says, um, I believe it's not safe for you to drive at this current time. And then it depends on, okay, is it dementia? Or are you recovering from a stroke? Because a stroke can get better. Dementia can only get worse. So you might say with a stroke, leave it for a little bit, so depends on the circumstances. But yeah, I mean, it's a very valid point. Um, you mentioned diabetes earlier. I've heard thoughts that dementia should be thought of as a type. Yeah, I don't know about that, but that's a good point. I'll have a look at that.
A lot
Um,
of work on that one,
isn't
Graham,
it?
that they're talking sort
Oh,
of
right.
because of the sugar damage, that it's increasing dementia. So just fairly new thinking.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Oh, that's
Mm.
interesting. See, this is why I'm setting up this community. People like yourself, for example, if you know about that type of thing, you guys from Scotland, because as
I'm from
we've got like
Yorkshire, actually, contrary accent, but let's not go there.
yeah, no, sorry, but I was separating the two. You guys from Scotland and then Stephen from Yorkshire. But you've got expert knowledge which I don't know about, and the more people we can get in, particularly in the focus groups we have, the better, really. So if anybody is interested in, just put it in the comments, or doing the part two. And yeah, okay, brilliant. So I will call it a day there unless anybody else got any more comments. And I'll send a copy of the slides out to you tomorrow. And then you'll have my email, of course. And then, so if you are interested in getting involved any further or keeping in touch, just let me know. But thanks very much for attending.
Thank you.
Okay,
Thanks,
thanks very
Graham.
much. Yeah,
What's the next stage for joining the part two?
just I've got a couple of dates on the slides which you'll get in May. Um, Pick one of those. Let me know. But I'll be reminding you all tomorrow with an email
Okay.
to each of you, and then you can just reply to that if you want.
Okay, I'll do
Okay,
that. Thank you.
brilliant. All right,
Thanks very
thanks
much.
Thank
for
you,
your
Graham.
time.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Bye.
Graham.
Bye.
Thank you all. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.